O Lord of hosts, be with us, for we have none other help in times of adversity but Thee. O Lord of hosts, have mercy on us.
Welcome back, everyone. This is David Patrick Carey with Church of the Eternal Logos, and today I want to speak to you guys about St. Justin Martyr and the Logos Spermatikos. Now, this is the 10th video in our video series on the development of Logos theology, in which we began with sort of the generalistic idea of Logos back with Heraclitus and his understanding of it as sort of organizing principle of the universe related to reason and logic and math. But it's the unifier of opposites. And so from there we began our video series, and then we went through the Sophist and Plato and Aristotle and the Stoics and the Middle Platonism in regards to Philo of Alexandria, the Neoplatonist, the Old Testament, and its understanding of Logos in regards from the Orthodox perspective, Christian Orthodoxy. And then we got into the last video, which was on St. John, the theologian, and his gospel, the Gospel of John, and his famous prologue, and Arche and Hologos. So that is where we have been. This is video 10. Now that Christianity's already been established, I want to make a few videos in the future in regards to this continuation of Logos theology. So today, I want to talk about Logos Spermatikos. I think this is a very important concept, an important word that should be put in everybody's sort of theological Christian lexicon in regards to Logos. We should know what Logos Spermatikos is. And then I will eventually want to do a video on the nous and also on St. Maximus Confessor and his Logos Logoi distinction. So those are some videos that you probably can't expect. Not going to promise when, but in the future, certainly. But today we're going to be focusing on the idea of Logos Spermatikos and how this is a really important concept for St. Justin Martyr, because many of his ideas, unfortunately, his Christologies and stuff like that, they're going to be condemned later in church history due to Greek philosophical Hellenistic influence upon his ideas. But one idea that does remain in the church is this concept of Logos Spermatikos, which he gets from Stoicism. It's a Stoic philosophical concept that then he Christianizes, reappropriates, redefines in a Christian context. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. I first want to talk about this concept, what it means. Then we're going to be getting into St. Justin Martyr, his life, some of the things that he discussed. I have his first apology. I have about 5 paragraphs there that I wanted to highlight. Very interesting stuff. That's his most famous work, his first apology. And then in this book, which if you guys have been with me throughout this video series, this book probably looks familiar. From Logos to Trinity, this is by Marian Hiller. And even though he's a non-believer and has some pejorative things to say at times about Christianity, this is a very insightful book. It's well written, it's well researched, it has footnotes right there on the bottom of the page, so great for people who like to do the research and read the footnotes. But he has an important chapter that I want to just be touching on today on St. Justin Martyr, his understanding of Logos, and he has a brief subsection within that chapter on Logos Spermatikos. So we're going to be working through that as well. And so that's what you can expect in today's video. But to begin, I first want to talk about what is Logos Spermatikos? What is this idea? Well, it's a Stoic philosophical concept. And so from the Stoic perception, Logos Spermatikos means the generative principle of the universe, which creates and takes back all things. Now, this is certainly going to be related to our Christian understanding of Logos Spermatikos, but we redefine it and go much further than that. So, yes, the Logos is the generative principle of the universe, which creates and takes back all things. But this all things is going to be related to this Spermatikos, this sort of Logos seed, which is present in all the world and in various cultures and non-Christian cultures and pagan cultures, right? So some of you guys have talked about the book, the Logos or the Eternal Tao, Christ the Eternal Tao, and Hieromonk Damascene, his understanding of Logos and Tao. Well, the reason why in Orthodoxy we can even do this is due to this idea of Logos Spermatikos, that anything that's true is a variation, has its rooting in some way or another in Logos. And so eventually, Wednesday, I'm going to be making a video on Logos Spermatikos versus perennialism, but we're going to avoid that discussion in this video. But Logos Spermatikos essentially is highlighting that anything that's true, that truth can be in pagan worldviews, in various other world religions, in Greek philosophy, for example. But it's not going to be the fullness of the truth, because the fullness of the Logos, the fullness of truth itself, is in the incarnation of Jesus, of the Logos in Jesus Christ, right? So this is where Justin Martyr is going to be taking this idea and really highlighting how truth, there are Christians that existed before Christ, and this is going to tie into, again, this idea of Logos Spermatikos, that people who are really living their life based on reason, based on logic, based on good morality, this type of stuff, are going to be moving in the direction towards Logos, whether this is pre-existent of Christ or not. And therefore, their works, their words, their deeds are going to have some bit of truth to them, some veracity, because it's in one way or another rooted within Logos. And so Logos Spermatikos is that there's seeds of truth all over the world. It's just the fullness only appears within the incarnation of that Logos in the person of Jesus of Nazareth. So this is generally the idea that we're going to be talking about. All truth is God's truth, but God's truth is all forms of the Logos, okay? So it's got to be in accordance with Logos, and so we have a firm sort of epistemology to root this in. It's all coming from the Christian tradition. So those who aren't going to agree with us are going to be like, oh, that's easy. You just choose and pick what you think is true based on your worldview from other worldviews. Yeah, but our argumentation is going to be a little bit better than that. But the idea is that our tradition, Logos theology, can be found bits and pieces, fragmentations, just little slivers all around world philosophy and theology. But as Justin Martyr will highlight, really, there's only one theology, that's Christian theology, and the rest is just philosophy. So that's where we're getting into. This is the idea of the Logos Spermatikos. Now, what I want to do is show you guys some iconography related to it. So in previous videos, you might have heard me talk about Justin Martyr, and he's famous for highlighting how Socrates and Plato and Aristotle could be considered Christians before Christ. Now, it's not that he's not going to disagree with maybe the overall premise of their teachings, but that there's aspects within their teachings he believes to be true. These are the seeds of Logos. This is how he would frame it. And so what I'm showing you guys right now is an icon where you're seeing two gentlemen, and this is Plato and Aristotle, holding these little green orbs. You see this right here in these icons, these little green orbs. And inside is a small child figure. You can't really tell. It's probably hard to discern for you guys, but these kind of emerald green orbs. What are these? Well, this is the Christian Orthodox iconographic representation of the Logos Spermatikos. So where you see icons of individuals holding these green orbs, these are non-Christians being depicted as having some root of truth within the worldview, some rooting within the Logos, and therefore holding the sort of seed of Logos, the Logos Spermatikos itself. And so I'm also showing you another icon here. This is of Jacob wrestling with the angel, and you're going to see this green orb again up in the top right corner. And even this particular scene is going to come back in our discussion. I have a quote from St. Justin Martyr regarding this specific narrative, this Old Testament narrative. So I want to highlight, before we go any further, on the use of this this use of Logos Spermatikos in iconography and what that means. And so this little 2 paragraphs that I'm getting ready to read to you guys comes from in regards to a discussion on that icon of Jacob wrestling with the angel and this little green orb up there in the corner. What is that green orb? And it says, the small person in the circle at the top right is a young Jesus Christ. In iconography, in his youthfulness, he is declared to be Logos Emmanuel, God within us. And this is going to be important in regards to some of the stuff that Justin Martyr is going to add to this concept of logos from Stoicism, is that the logos itself is a sort of bit of reason, a bit of logic, a bit of the logos that is present within us. And so this is Orthodoxy talking about how its understanding of this is the Logos Emmanuel. Logos Emmanuel, God within us, the logos within us. The Prosopon school additionally ties the Logos Emmanuel, God within us, to Justin Martyr's and St. Maximus the Confessor's concept of the Logos Spermatikos, the seed word imprinted in every human, there to be discovered and recognized. It is the Logos Spermatikos that Jacob senses within his carnal self, but cannot name. God here is the iconographic form of an angel. He wrestles with Jacob in love. After Jacob recognizes that the angel is God, he begs for a blessing. The angel is able to bestow a new name and a new path. And now that Jacob/Israel begins his new path, the future incarnation of the Logos Emmanuel stirs. The interesting question arises, why does the divine angel not overcome his lowly human opponent? The presence of the Logos Spermatikos helps us see that the angel's visit to Jacob prefigures the strange self-emptying and humiliation of God in every theophany and concludes on the cross outside of Jerusalem. Jacob's firm grip on the angel can be seen as the pride of humanity, which needs wounding. It is a pride that needs wounding in order to remember the necessary ascetic discipline and to remain humble in spite of having met God. So right here we see the Logos Emmanuel, the Logos Spermatikos in this depiction, and then we also see the Logos Spermatikos being held by Plato and Aristotle in this other icon. Okay, excellent. So now let's move on from there. And so we have a general idea of what the Logos Spermatikos is. It's this idea that Logos is present all around the world, truth, all truth is God's truth, that God is Logos, that God is the second person of the Christian Trinity, and it reveals then the nature of the Father, which is the essence of the Trinity and unites all three persons. Okay, so who then is Justin Martyr? Because this is going to be important into getting into his first apology, where he is really trying to highlight, he's trying to emphasize this Logos Spermatikos. Of course, unfortunately, this is going to lead to him really continuing some of the problems with the Hellenistic philosophical project, but this idea is really important nonetheless. So one of the things that Justin Martyr says is that each philosopher, and he's meaning a philosopher, a poet, or historian, each spoke well in proportion to the share he had of that spermatic logos, or word. And so those who speak truth are speaking truth due to that kind of innate Logos Emmanuel within every person, that ability, the propensity of individuals who may not even be Christian to speak truthful things, because truth itself only comes from one source, because truth itself is objective, it's not relative, so it can't be a multiplicity, right? We can't have a bunch of different epistemologies and understandings of truth, because then we don't have a strict gradient to really grade all this stuff from. So Justin Martyr, then, he believed that Christianity is the true religion. He was not born Christian. This is a man who converted. He believes that the seeds can be found throughout human history. He believes that there's various manifestations of logos within world history, world philosophy, world theology. And in his first apology, he's really explicating a lot of these ideas in regards to the prefiguring of Christ and his resurrection, or his virgin birth. He talks about how this stuff has been prefigured throughout human history and through myths and stuff like that. And that the logos spreads like a flame. This is going to come up in Marian Hiller's discussion. And this is really important because for Heraclitus, this concept of logos was always tied to fire and flame. And for Justin Martyr, he highlights that flame or fire is a great metaphor for the logos, because fire itself can be passed on and the essence of fire doesn't change, which then highlights its relationship to the Father. Though it's begotten, it's still of the same flame, because fire itself works on these kind of metaphoric levels that are good pedagogically speaking, right? And you can use fire to really explicate and explain this concept of one essence, but in multiple persons or multiple forms. And so what's interesting is the associations of light and fire throughout the Greek philosophical tradition. So we're talking 500 years before Christ with Heraclitus, has always been there as being a sort of metaphor and association with logos as fire, flame, and light. Okay, and we're going to see this again with Justin Martyr. Now, Justin Martyr, he was born in the year 100. Fortunately, he died in the year 165. He only lived for 65 years, and he was martyred. Obviously, that's where he gets his name, Justin Martyr. But he was killed with his students, and so kind of sad, but he was pretty based in a lot of stuff. To use the language of the kids, Justin Martyr was a Chad, and he was very based, but he did have some problematic theology. Interestingly, he began his search. So like I mentioned, he was born around Palestine. He's born of Greek-Roman origins. His grandfather had a Greek name. His father had a Latin name, a Roman name, which then has brought up controversy about maybe his family heritage in regards to potentially political ties to Rome or all this stuff. But he grew up educated by pagans, had a sort of prevalence for philosophy, really liked philosophy. And he began kind of as an adult to search for truth in God. And he talks about this in, I forget. So he has three main works that we have. The rest we don't have. His first apology, his second apology, and his discussion with Trypho. So I forget which one it comes from, but he talks about his beginning education. I want to say it's with his discussion with Trypho, where he really talks about his beginning education and how he first went to a Stoic philosophy. So he was studying all the different philosophies. Stoicism and Middle Platonism are going to be the big ones that are going to be influential in his time. So representing Middle Platonism is going to be Philo of Alexandria. Remember, the Hellenistic Jew who, at the time of Christ, he was living at the time of Jesus Christ, was talking about the Old Testament and Moses and this Greek concept of the Logos and how God's Word is present throughout the Old Testament. This is what Philo of Alexandria was obsessed with, really talking about Logos, the Word of God, present in Old Testament Scripture. So you can see how Justin Martyr, he's going to pick up on this concept relatively quick, and having been somebody enamored with philosophy, is going to have a lot of different places to grasp this concept of logos from, especially given that the sort of Greek language is where his basis is going to be rooted in, not Hebrew Old Testament, which is going to come up. So as an adult, he first was approaching which tradition could really offer him truth and an understanding of God. He wanted a coherent understanding of theology and metaphysics, and this is what his sort of prerequisites were when he was going out and meeting with various philosophers. And he met with a Stoic philosopher, and he claimed that he couldn't provide an understanding of God's being, of God's ontology. So he kind of dismissed Stoicism. Then he went and he met with a Peripatetic philosopher, which is going to be tied to Aristotle, the Peripatetic School, right? This term comes from Aristotle, and his students like to walk around and philosophize. So he met with a Peripatetic philosopher, and he said the guy was more interested in getting his fees than teaching knowledge or understanding truth. So kind of dismissed the sort of Aristotelian school of philosophy. He said he went to a Pythagorean, and the Pythagorean demanded that before he even be educated or brought into the Pythagorean school, he had to learn music, astronomy, and geometry. And just out of, I guess, spite, Justin refused. So he dismissed the Pythagorean school. Eventually, he found a Platonist who moved, we believe, somewhere in the vicinity that he was living in regards to Palestine, because he's still a young man at this point. The rest of his life is mostly going to be spent within Rome, and that's where he's going to be martyred as well. But he comes in contact with a Platonist, and just becomes enamored with Platonic philosophy. And this sort of, again, if you watch the video I did on how you prove God to an atheist regarding the transcendental argument, that there's two sort of philosophical approaches. There's more than this, but I dichotomized it between Plato and Aristotle. And Plato starts a priori, starts with the at the paradigmatic realm, starts with the world of ideas, and then deduces from there, where Aristotle begins with induction, sense data, the here and now, and then deduces from this information that you can gather, sort of empiricism, scientific method, right? Justin was infatuated with the Platonic starting point of ideas and concepts, and he talked about how it felt like it gave his mind wings. And then only after a time did he realize his own stupidity, and really fell out of love then with Platonism. And so it wasn't until he met a Syrian Christian that he was introduced then to the Old Testament and Christian revelation. So again, he's a young man here, earnest in his pursuit of knowledge and truth. And he comes across this Syrian Christian who then talks about a source of wisdom that's beyond the follies of man and the follies of philosophy. And he's talking about the Old Testament. He's talking about this God revealed himself throughout history, and that these men were more righteous. And this is what you're really looking for. This is Justin's story of this Syrian Christian talking to him. But he thought, oh wow, this is really interesting, and he started to look into Old Testament scripture, Christianity, stuff like this. And what really convinced him, and he later devotes his life to Christianity, moves to Rome, founds what's arguably is the first Christian school, kind of academic school he founds. But it's Christian morality and it's the martyrs that really, really impressed Justin Martyr in his conversion to Christianity. He thought the morality of Christianity was just far leaps and bounds beyond the sort of pagan world he was living in. And then to see the willingness of Christians to die at the hands of Romans instilled with him a sort of reverence that they really do have something here that they're willing to die for. And so these are the things which really, propelled him into the Christian tradition. Now, in regards to his first apology, which is one of the things that I wanted to read, actually, the first thing I want to read is regard to Christian morality. I thought this was just so, just really, really interesting. So if you guys have, you can find Justin Martyr's first apologies online somewhere with a Google search. If you guys want, you can email me at churchoftheeternallogos@gmail.com, churchoftheeternallogos@gmail.com. Email me, and I can send you my version, my PDF version of his first apology. It's going to have some highlights on it. You might be able to actually undo that because it's all digital. But if you want that, email me. I can send it to you, or you just do your own Google search. You should be able to find it somewhere online. Now, what I want to read here is in regards to, because in his first apology, one of the themes that are really present over and over, of course, is this logos spermatikos, highlighting Christianity being the absolute truth and even prefiguring Christ itself, but then also Christian morality being leaps and bounds beyond the other traditions around. So this is from chapter 27, The Guilt of Exposing Children. And I read this, and I just thought it was very timely given our situation in 2020. But this is what Justin Martyr writes in the 2nd century. But as for us, we have been taught that to expose newly born children is part of wicked men. And this we have been taught lest we should do anyone an injury, and lest we should sin against God first, because we see that almost all so exposed, not only the girls, but also the males, are brought up to prostitution. So he's talking about how these children are exposed. What it seems like what he's talking about is exposed to sexuality, and therefore they're being brought up and they eventually become prostitutes of society. And as the ancients are said to have reared herds of oxen or goats or sheep or grazing horses, so now we see you rear children only for this shameful use and for this pollution, a multitude of females and hermaphrodites, and those who commit unmentionable iniquities are found in every nation. So he's talking about how people are raising children for prostitution like they raise animals. and talking about the pollution of females and hermaphrodites. Interesting. And you receive the hire of these, and duty and taxes from them, whom you ought to exterminate from your realm. Base check. And anyone who uses such persons besides the godless and infamous and impure intercourse may possibly be having intercourse with his own child or relative or brother. So he's talking about incest and how incest occurs amongst the amongst the non-Christians. And who knows, they could be having sex with their own children or a relative or even their brother. And there are some who prostitute even their own children and wives. And some are openly mutilated for the purpose of sodomy, and they refer these mysteries to the mother of the gods. And along with each of those whom you esteem gods, there is painted a serpent. So I think it's interesting to note that this is all occurring under a goddess-worshipping tradition, aka feminism, all this stuff, paganism. A great symbol of mystery, referring to the serpent, because this actually, has a totally different context in the Christian worldview than, say, maybe the pagan Greek worldview. Indeed, the things which you do openly and with applause, as if the divine light were overturned and extinguished, these you lay to our charge, which in truth does no harm to us who shrink from doing any such things, but only to those who do them and then bear false witness against us. So he's talking about the pagans who do all these things, these horrible things that is common in society, and then they accuse Christians of doing it when they're the ones that are actually refusing and would never do such a thing. They have a morality that prevents them from normalizing such behavior. So that is the first thing that I wanted to read in regards to his discussion on morality. So that's why his first apology is really interesting if you dive into it. And so here's another section. This is more at the beginning of the first apology. This is chapter 5, and he's talking about Christians being charged with atheism. And now he's discussing, and so you're getting here a taste for his logos spermatikos and how he uses it, and that truth was present before Christ, and that truth is logos. Logos is fully captured in the Christian tradition because logos incarnated in Jesus of Nazareth. And so he says, he's talking about how, the people that are the most demonic and sinful are the ones who want to accuse other people of being atheists. And now he's pointing out this happened to Socrates. And when Socrates endeavored by true reason and examination to bring these things to light and to deliver men from the demons, then the demons themselves, by means of men who rejoiced in iniquity, compassed his death as an atheist and a profane person on the charge that, quote, he was introducing new divinities. And in our case, they display a similar activity. For not only among the Greeks did reason, logos, prevail to condemn these things through Socrates, but also among the barbarians were they condemned by reason, or the word, or the logos himself, who took shape and became man and was called Jesus Christ. And in obedience to him, we not only deny that they who did such things, that we deny they who did such things as these are gods, but assert that they are wicked and impious demons whose actions will not bear comparison with those even of men desirous of virtue. So there's one little section there, but you see how he's equating Socrates' use of reason to defend. He talked about some of the polytheism and stuff going on in Greek tradition and their narratives about gods kind of being illogical, so he's charged with being a sort of atheist and all this stuff. So here's another section. This is chapter 20. This is called Heathen Analogies to Christian Doctrine. So again, logos spermatikos, right? He's talking about heathen analogies, how, again, the truth which is Christian, essence of it, parts of it, I don't want to say essence, maybe, parts of it can be found in other world traditions, even heathen analogies. And so here's a section from that, which he says, if therefore on some points we teach the same things as the poets and philosophers whom you honor, and on other points are fuller and more divine in our teachings, and if we alone afford proof that we assert why are we unjustly hated more than others? For while we say that all things have been produced and arranged into a world by God, we shall seem to utter the doctrine of Plato. And while we say that there will be a burning up of all, we shall seem to utter the doctrine of the Stoics. And while we affirm that the souls of the wicked, being endowed with sensation even after death, are punished, and that those of the good, being delivered from punishment, spend a blessed existence, we shall seem to say the same things as the poets and philosophers. And while we maintain that men ought not to worship the works of their hands, we say the very things which have been said by the comic poet Menander and other similar writers, for they have declared that the workman is greater than the work. So the workman, this is kind of an emphasis at worship the creator, not the creation. So there's another instance of this idea of logos spermatikos. And so here's a chapter in which is titled The Argument. And this is where he's really talking about logos spermatikos without ever really saying it. He says, and that this may be now become evident to you, that whatever we assert in conformity with what has been taught to us by Christ and by the prophets who preceded him are alone true, and are older than all the writers who have existed, which that could be a contentious claim. That we claim to be acknowledged, and because we say the same things as these writers said, but because we say true things. And secondly, that Jesus Christ is the only proper Son who has been begotten by God, being his word, his logos, his first begotten in power, and becoming man according to his will. He taught us these things for the conversion and restoration of the human race. And thirdly, that before he became a man among men, some influenced by the demons before mentioned, related beforehand, through the instrumentality of the poets, those circumstances as having really happened, which, having fictitiously devised, they narrated in the same manner as they have caused to be fabricated the scandalous reports against us, or infamous and impious actions, of which there are neither witness nor proof. We shall bring forward the following proof. So he's talking about all truth, again, is Christian, even though it may be found in other places, and that it's through demons, it's through people that are in opposition to truth who want to continually persecute and kill Christians. Again, remember, he's martyred, he's beheaded in Rome with his students. And so here is the last thing that I wanted to read, and this is in regards to the logos in the world before Christ. And so I've read this before, actually, in my video on Heraclitus, but I'll read it again. And sorry for the awkward word. The way that this is translated is awkward to read. It's not in our sort of common phrasing, But lest some should, so this style, the logos in the world before Christ, but lest some should, without reason, and for the perversion of what we teach, maintain that we say that Christ was born 150 years ago under Cyrenius, and subsequently in the time of Pontius Pilate, taught what we say he taught, and should cry out against us as though all men who were born before him were irresponsible, let us anticipate and solve the difficulty. So, let us solve the problem that everybody was ignorant before Christ then. We have been taught that Christ is the firstborn of God, and we have declared above that he is the Logos, of whom every race of men were partakers, and those who lived reasonably are Christians, even though they have been thought atheists, as among the Greeks, Socrates and Heraclitus, and men like them, and among the barbarians, Abraham and Ananias and Azarias and Misael, and Elias, and many others whose actions and names we now decline to recount because we know it would be tedious, so that even they who lived before Christ and lived without reason were wicked and hostile to Christ, and slew those who lived reasonably, but who, through the power of the word of the Logos, according to the will of God the Father and Lord of all, he was born of a virgin as a man, and was named Jesus, and was crucified, and died, and rose again, and ascended into heaven. An intelligent man will be able to comprehend from what has already been so largely said, And we, since the proof of this subject is less needful now, will pass for the present to the proof of those things which are urgent. And so the idea that reasonable men have been persecuted, again, he's tying that to the earlier, I think that was chapter 5 I was reading with Socrates, right? Socrates was condemned as an atheist and a hedonist, all these negative things that are being attributed to the Christians because he was speaking reasonably about the world. This is what Martyr's trying to discuss here. So that is what I wanted to just highlight briefly within his first apology. And now we're going to be getting straight into Marian Hiller and what he has to say about some of this stuff. So I have various things underlined in this book, and we're just going to move through, and I just want to point out some of this stuff. So the first thing is in regards to just who Justin was. And what he is known for is he introduced new concepts and phrases not found in the Synoptic Gospels and followed Philo of Alexandria's road to Nicaea. His doctrines were formed under the influence of various religious and philosophical trends of his time. He was influenced by Jewish biblical exegesis, Judeo-Christian writings, Christian Gnostic doctrines, current Greek religious doctrines, and Middle Platonism. However, the primary influence exerted on him was the writings of Philo of Alexandria, whom he mentions by name 3 times in the dialogue with Trypho, and the Greek philosopher Numenius. Here's another thing in regards to his heritage. I was trying to talk about his father had a Greek name, his father had a Roman name, his grandfather had a Greek name, but he was brought up in the Gentile Greco-Roman culture. His ancestors were probably Greek colonists who settled in Palestine. His accounts of studies of the various Greek philosophical schools in search of intellectual explanation of existential questions is a literary function, though it may be based on some personal experience. So you see this, he's a non-believer, very skeptical of Justin's self-narrative about what brought him to Christianity. He claims that he had a very high regard for philosophical investigation in line with the Stoic and Philonic traditions, Philo. Philosophy, according to him, is one's greatest possession and is most precious in the sight of God, to whom it alone leads us and to whom it unites us. And those who have applied themselves to philosophy are holy men. But his definition and understanding of philosophy were very limited. He understood it in a very narrow meaning as the knowledge of the existing one, that is, of God, an understanding of the truth, capital T, that is revelation. The goal of philosophy, according to Justin, was to achieve a vision of God and reach a certain mystical unity with God. So that, I thought, was a good summation of some of the stuff about him. Another sentence here says, Justin is the most influential Christian theoretician of the 2nd century who formulated assertions of the one of the trends of the developing Christianity. That doesn't sound right at all. Until then, far dispersed and not systematized into a more rigorous and formalistic system. That's not going to happen until the councils, right? Okay, anyways, let's get into Logos Spermatikos. And so this is I think the important concept that we all need to add to our lexicon as Christians, Logos Spermatikos. We have truth. We have it. If your tradition has truth, well, our tradition, your truth is just a diluted form of our tradition. Okay, that's basically Logos Spermatikos. And so here's a few of the excerpts I wanted to read to you guys in regards to Justin Martyr and Logos Spermatikos. In Heraclitus, the Logos was an aspect and function of the cosmic fire. With the Stoics, the Logos became a cosmic rational principle, the vehicle for which was pneuma, and which was responsible for maintaining and governing the universe as well as human rationality. Still later, it became an element of human moral responsibility and moral awareness. It could be equated with the world soul as spoken by Alcinous and Atticus, with the second God or mind of Numenius and the first power of God of Philo. And so skipping a bit, so they're talking about how for Justin, he's beginning to talk about a sort of Trinitarian understanding of God with this pneuma. There's the first God and the second God, and there's a sort of pneuma. And it gets ambiguous, the pneuma's relationship to the second God and all this stuff. But this is why his theology can be heretical. And even the Logos Spermatikos was controversial because if you guys are familiar with some of the epistles of Paul, he talks about the foolishness of the wisdom of this world, which philosophy itself was associated with. And so you see this sort of principle within Protestantism and their sort of objection to philosophy in various ways, the Greek tradition, pagan wisdom, this type of stuff. And that sentiment was already present early on. And so Logos Spermatikos is obviously in opposition to that. So somebody like Maximus the Confessor, John of Damascus, they're going to be proponents of learning philosophy. Not that it contains the truth, but that there is some truth in it. It is useful, and it's going to help you better articulate and understand the Logos, God, Jesus Christ, the Christian Trinity. Okay, so moving forward, here's another subject. This was possible because in the Heraclitean Stoic tradition, human reason was part of the original divine logos, originally a cosmic fire that we acquire through breathing. So we see breathing, the breath, pneuma, being tied with the activation of this logos or this cosmic fire within ourselves. And I think that you would find something similar even in Taoism, not saying Taoism is true, but these concepts, right? Maybe there's more Spermatikos here. And so here is a quick excerpt that I wanted to highlight, that Justin states that the Logos is the personal reason of God in which all men partake. And Justin Martyr says, for not only among the Greeks were these things revealed through Socrates by reason Logos, but also among the non-Hellenic peoples by the Logos himself, who assumed a human form and became man and was called Jesus Christ. That was from one of the excerpts that I actually read to you guys. And so it goes on, and it says, he even praises the Stoics for their doctrine of morals, but referring to their metaphysical doctrine, he claims they are wrong in their teaching on principles and incorporeal beings. Why? Remember the first thing that I said, and this is from his dialogue with Trypho, the Stoics couldn't account, they had poor metaphysics. They couldn't give God an ontology. They couldn't account for God's being because nature, Logos creates nature. Logos is sort of subservient to this sort of Stoic concept of God, if you will, but it's all related to eternity, and so it's really confusing. How did God account for it? It doesn't really work in their system. It's difficult. So he already saw this and said, oh, but their morals are right, because remember what I talked about in the Stoicism video is that the highest thing in Stoicism is virtue. Virtue is what it's all about. When you're being virtuous, you're in line with Logos, right? And so again, as us Christians, what's more virtuous than Jesus Christ? Which would even make sense from this sort of Logos framing within Stoicism, right? Again, not that we're Stoic. Another quote that I have of him in regards to each person was able to speak well according to the part present in him of the divine Logos, who is the sower, and whenever he sowed, that was akin to him. So this seed within everybody, he's connecting back to Matthew and the parable of the seeds and the sower. And he says, everything that the philosophers or legislators discussed and expressed well, they accomplished through their discovery and contemplation of some part of the Logos. But since they did not have a full knowledge of the Logos, which is Jesus Christ, they often contradicted themselves. And that's what we see. That's what we do in apologetics, to try to get at contradictions, right? And that's why Jay Dyer, I think, is so good as an apologist and as a debater, more so than I am. So, next section that I wanted to read. Justin thus claims that every man has an intellectual power implanted, a Logos, which is specified as either a seed of the Logos or a part of the divine sower Logos, which is the natural source of wisdom for all men. Justin, for example, holds Socrates in particularly high regard, claiming that Socrates knew Christ partially as, quote, he, Christ, was and is the Logos, who is in every person and who foretold the things that were to come to pass both through the prophets and in his own person, when he assumed our nature and taught these things. So the validity, the veracity of Socrates' teachings are only because in some variation he was close to the Logos. Of course, that Logos is going to become incarnate. And so he says, Christians live by the knowledge and contemplation of the whole Logos of God, which is Christ. What we have then appears to be greater than all human teachings, because the whole rational principle, Logos, became Christ, who appeared for our sake, body, reason, and soul. And so here's a paragraph that I wanted to read on this sort of sower and seed parable in relation to Logos and the Logos Spermatikos and all individuals, but also in all cultures and all forms of knowledge. There is an equivalency between the terms seed of the Logos and part of the spermatic divine Logos, and both are related to the sower, the spermatic Logos, as a part of the whole. What Justin wants to say is that in his anthropology, the rational part of the human constitution, or the rational part of the soul, is carried out by the noetic substance, which is the fragment or part of the divine Logos, i.e., pneuma of Christ, which is at the same time the sower, Logos Spermatikos in Justinian nomenclature of itself. Of course, the source of the sower Logos is God the Father. In incarnate Christ, his Logos was the whole divine Logos. And so this is really important too, what I was seeing with what Justin Martyr began to do that was really important. He doesn't necessarily have the whole anthropology correct of nous, body, soul, right? And then nous really being a sort of second dimension of the soul itself. But you see that he's even trying to use and redefine the concept of nous. This is made apparent by Marian Hiller in his section, that Justin is recognizing the necessity of the hypostatization and the personhood of the Trinity. So he's trying to advocate for more of a differentiation between what he's calling the second God and the first God, the Father and the Son, the Logos being the Son, and really separating these two. So he doesn't want to fall back into Sabellianism, even though this at this time isn't a problem yet. They haven't used these terms, but this is what he's trying to do. He really wants to form a unique and differentiated idea of God, but all connected by the same essence. And so that's why this idea, I think, is so important, and why I want to make videos afterwards on the anthropology of the nous and Maximus Confessor and Logos Logoi, because if Logos is the creator and sort of, I don't want to use this phrase, but for lack of a better word, a sort of mediator between us and the Father, even though we still have direct access to the personhood of the Father, I'm not saying we don't, but what is transcendent and unavailable to us through knowledge about the Father can be attained through the Logos, that our interaction with the uncreated energies of the Logos are the Logoi, and the Logoi we interact with through our nous, and these Logoi then from the Logos Spermatikos level are kind of all around the world to a degree. And so even these historical individuals, you could begin to see how the cleansing of their nous and the eyes of the soul, the eyes of the heart, is going to allow them to perceive more and more of the Logos, which is part of Orthodox doctrine in itself. And so this is going to be tied to Logos theology, and that's why I want to incorporate those in the video series eventually. But anyways, that's a digression. Moving on, here's a section that I wanted to highlight, and it reads, he asserts that ancient writers, meaning Justin asserts, by means of an engrafted seed of the Word, of the Logos, that was implanted in them, had a slim glimpse of the truth. So they had a slim glimpse of the truth because of the what we began this video with, the Logos Emmanuel, right? The Logos Emmanuel that is depicted within that icon with Jacob wrestling the angel, and the Logos Emmanuel being present within every individual, which even then sort of foreshadows the incarnation, right? And that the Logos was already present within humanity, present within individuals before he even incarnated, and sort of sanctified matter, divinized human nature, and bridge that gap between human nature and divine nature. Okay, next paragraph. The incarnate Christ is identified with the entire Logos, which became a human being in all three respects of humanity: body, Logos, and soul. But the incarnate Christ is not of human origin, has no real blood relation with the human race, and has not assumed humanity. However, he became a human being, still retaining all his powers of the Logos of God. So this is a little confusing for me in regards to his Christology. This could be interpreted various ways, but as long as he believed he was fully human and fully God, which it seems like he did, but this last statement that Marian Hiller says, at least, that has not assumed humanity, that seems like it's saying that he didn't assume human nature, which is going to be problematic for us. Next paragraph, though, that I wanted to read. The original concept of the Logos Spermatikos, or seed force, was developed by the Stoics, who designated the primal principle of the cosmic pneuma, Logos, operating as the seminal Logos, or seed, of the natural world. Thus, the souls of men partook of the cosmic Logos. This principle, operating in individual beings in the world, was designated as seminal because it has the generative source of everything in the world, physical and noetic. So right there we see to use Kantian categories, the noumenal and the phenomenal, right? So this Logos combines the noumenal, right, the sort of conceptual, the a priori realm, the mental realm, with the phenomenal, the physical, right? And again, I dichotomize that as like Plato and Aristotle, right, where they begin their philosophies, two different realms. One begins in the noumenal, one begins in the phenomenal. And so I love that section, that the Logos and the sower and the seeds, and that the sower placed his seeds in the sort of phenomenal realm, really, which are going to lead to people who get close relationship to that Logos seed. They're going to have a better understanding in the noumenal realm, which is going to relate to divine mind, all this stuff, theology, right? How we root transcendentals. It all makes sense. Next paragraph that I wanted to highlight says, Philo understood the seminal or generative Logos as the archetypal ideas that exist in the world and constitute reality. They make things and events happen in the natural physical world, just as they operate in the process of intellection and moral judgment. And then we have a quote from Cicero that I'm going to skip. And here's something more about Justin and Logos. It says, it seems that Justin used the reference of the seed of truth as being present in the moral and intellectual striving of men, which is the moral disposition implanted in the soul of men as a part of the whole, the divine Logos. Christ, in doing this, Justin, that was a comment. The divine Logos, Christ, okay. In doing this, Justin also alludes to the Stoic idea of general concepts as the concepts given to man a priori, Kantian word here, which are predominantly of a religious and moral character and embodied in man and providing him with the faculty of knowing good and evil. So right there we see there's so much there to unpack in regards to the uniting of opposites, good and evil, and the ability to recognize this stuff is your relationship with the Logos and see all this stuff. It's just amazing. This stuff, Logos theology, it's incredible. Okay, and so one of the things that I wanted to, I still got more. Here was another section of a paragraph I wanted to read. In Justin, however, the Logos plants itself in the form of its own substance. In one fragment, Numenius, and this is a Byzantine philosopher, Numenius, who Justin is grabbing ideas from because he's talking a lot about the concept of nous. Now, again, this is different from our Orthodox concept. This is not the nous of the eyes of the soul. This is the Greek nous of basically just mind, your intellectual activity, right? This is the Greek nous. So although Justin, you see him moving towards what will eventually become a sort of Orthodox understanding of nous in regards to its relationship to soul and heart and perception of Logos. Numenius clarifies that it is the second God, mind, who sends the intellect, nous, down to earth to all those who are destined to participate in it. If so, then we may identify the second mind as the logos spermatikos, because it propagates the idea, capital I, the noetic world that partakes of it in the individual soul. The noetic world within the individual soul is a presentation of the second mind, which partakes of reality and has been implanted by itself, the second mind, the logos. It corresponds in Justin's systems to the seed or part of the Spermatikos logos, the whole logos or the logos itself. And so moving on here, you can see, again, from what I just read, you can see how this is moving in the direction of nous, which is going to be tied to the reception of those uncreated energies, which is going to be tied to how we understand logos, which is going to be tied to then our understanding of Trinity and God. And this is logos theology. And so next thing that I wanted to read says, further, Justin argues using the Philonic metaphor. Not only the logos was a name distinct from the Father, as the light is from the sun, and this is the metaphor that he's using from Philo, the sun's rays being separate from the sun. He ties this to logos and Father, how logos is different from Father, but tied together. Father as the light, distinct from the Father as the light is from the sun, but that it was numerically distinct, which meant for Justin a different being or entity. Using the scripture as evidence, Justin claims that he can show that God has begotten of himself a certain rational power as a beginning before all other creatures. So again, the beginning and the end, a unification of opposites, again, something that we would find in Heraclitus, 500 BC. The Son of God is clearly, although that's not the full revelation of the logos, right? I want to be clear that I'm never advocating for this generalistic Greek idea of logos, only the Christian, Orthodox Christian understanding of logos. The Son of God is clearly an explicit individualization or hypostatization of an attribute of God. Justin explicitly claims he is, quote, another God, begotten by an act of the Father's will, and was also generated a second time in human form during the incarnation. The purpose of Christ's incarnation was the defeat of the demons, in accordance with the Hellenic tradition and quite in accordance with the Hebrew tradition, to call to repentance. There is not a trace here of Pauline redemption theory, but only Greek religion mixed with a Hebrew attitude. So that was something I thought was interesting that Hiller added. And, I still got more. He also says, Justin argues quite in the Greek tradition that God has a son who, being the first begotten logos of the God, is also a God. That is why Justin went through the trouble of demonstrating that the individuality of this second God, or Christ, called logos, is evident from the theophanies recorded in the Old Testament. This is Philo of Alexandria's work as well that he's building upon, which point to another God who appeared either to the patriarchs or from the passages where God the Father is presented as speaking to another God or gods, the Trinity. And moving downwards, here's another section I wanted to read. Justin, on the contrary, is the first among the Christians who insisted on the numerical distinction of the Logos from the Transcendent Father as a second God. So he's the first one that really arguing for the personhood, it's a separate personhood of the Logos, of Jesus. In doing so, he realized that such a distinction of the Logos is a ditheism. So he preserved the monotheism by emphasizing the singularity and superiority of the divine pneumatic being, the Father, interior to creation, and the subordination of the second God to the first, the Father. This is going to be a problem. See, the subordination idea is problematic. It's related to Platonic worldviews, emanationism, and this is where we're going to be condemning a lot of the stuff from Justin Martyr because, one, it's not a full explication of the Trinity, And this idea that the Logos would be subordinate to the Father is too much like Plato, too much like the Stoics, too much like Neoplatonism and Middle Platonism, stuff like that. That's where he's getting this stuff from. Thus, according to Justin, the Logos was begotten by the will and power of God as a preparatory step before the creation of the universe, and not as a process of internal creation as in the Phalonic theory. The Logos thus is the firstborn, and it is the beginning of all created things, first begotten of all creatures. And that Phalonic theory of eternal creation is a problem, right? So this is going to be basically most of the worldviews before, it's going to differentiate the Hebrew tradition and the Christian tradition from a lot of the other worldviews, which Plato, Aristotle, a lot of the Greek philosophers, they're going to be tied to this sort of understanding of creation as being eternal, where we believe creation has a beginning, a middle, and an end. This is essential in our understanding of eschatology, of time. And so here is the excerpt. So I'm going to be pulling up that icon again of Jacob wrestling with the angel, because here is a great excerpt I wanted to read in regards to that. And it says, the name Israel, this is Justin Martyr speaking, the name Israel then means a man who overcomes power, for Isra is a man who overcomes, and El is power. That Christ would do this when he became man was thus foretold by the mystery of Jacob's wrestling with him who appeared to him, in that Christ ministered to the will of God. Yet he is God, because he is the first begotten of all creatures. And so that really doesn't hint at the Logos Spermatikos necessarily, but I thought it was interesting that one of the icons used to depict the Logos Spermatikos is an Old Testament reference to the same thing. And then the last, let's see. No, I have a few more things. Okay, well, the next thing is the concept of the Logos introduced into early Christian thought became a useful and convenient tool to bridge Christianity and Hellenism on the one hand, and served as a vehicle of bridging Judaism with Greek religion on the other. In Greek philosophical thought, there was a need for a link between God, who became absolutized in the Platonic and Aristotelian systems, and the visible world. And such a link was provided by the Stoic Logos. Okay. So, next one, and this is another quote that I'm going to be reading from Justin. And in this second coming, according to Justin, was also predicted by the prophets. Quote, he shall gloriously come from heaven with his angelic army, and he shall also raise to life the bodies of all the men that ever were, shall cloak the worthy with immortality, and shall relegate the wicked subject to sensible pain for all eternity into the eternal fire together with the evil demons. Justin, inspired by the vision of the book of Daniel, chapter 7, verse 13, describes the coming of the Jewish Messiah, who is to perform his function of a judge, applying Daniel's vision to Jesus Christ, and to himself will pass judgment on the whole human race. Which, of course, the Logos being the judge, if it's the source of reason, logic, judgment itself, of course the Logos is going to be the judge. And mind you, Daniel also prophetizes, he has the prophecy that the destruction of the temple is going to occur in 70 AD, as long as, and Christ also says this, so interesting maybe tidbit there. The Logos doctrine provided a basis for the intellectual view of salvation still rooted in the Hebrew tradition. That is, that the Logos, as the Christ/Messiah, was the teacher of the word that brought salvation to man. Jesus Christ alone is properly the Son of God, since he is the Word, the Logos, the first begotten, and the power. And having become man by his will, he taught us these doctrines for the conversion and restoration of humankind. And commenting on the verse of Isaiah, Isaiah chapter 1, verse 10 through 20, Justin claims, "Indeed, Isaiah did not send you to the bath to wash away murder and other sins which all the water of the ocean could not cleanse, but by faith through the blood of the death of Christ, who suffered death for this precise purpose." So, and the last thing I wanted to highlight and conclude this video was that the Johannine Logos, so the Gospel of John, his prologue, in Arche and Ho Logos, the Johannine Logos is non-philosophical. It is based on the Old Testament doctrine of the Word, the Davar, the Dabar, or the Mimra. These are Hebrew terms for like God's Word. Logos. Davar equals logos, as the expression of God in the creation and revelation. Analysis of the text shows that Justin's interpretation of the logos in the religious context is a Philonic one, as an intermediate between transcendent God and man, and as an agent of God or second God, and not the Stoic one as the universal reason. Justin's logos is Jesus Christ, the Messiah, understood in the light of a fancy reading of the Old Testament Word of God and Greek philosophy as an individual, pneumatic, and personified intermediary of God. The logos is generated for the purpose of creation and revelation as the agent and servant of God. That's Justin Martyr. And so then he also begins to associate the logos as an angel, which is, again, going to be sort of problematic and maybe in regards to our Christology, although we believe that Christ, the Logos, did appear in the Old Testament as an angel, as various different things, as Sophia, as wisdom, all this stuff. So anyways, this concludes our video of the Logos, Spermatikos, and St. Justin Martyr, and how Logos, truth, can be found in a multitude of knowledge systems and wisdom traditions, even in pagan religion and pagan systems. Not that they're true in and of themselves, but that various aspects may be true because they are in relation to logos, and that logos theology then is the only theology that really exists. So that's what I wanted to talk to you guys about today. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you know anybody who could be interested in this content, please share this video with them. I know it's a bit of a long video, but I think we covered a lot of material here. We looked at icons of the Logos Spermatikos. We talked about the concept, its origins. We talked about St. Justin Martyr and a lot of stuff related to his ideas in life and work. So a lot of ground was covered in this video. I hope you guys liked it. Please let me know what you guys think in the comment section. Leave comments. Sorry for some of the misreadings. The wording of his first apology can get awkward at times, but let me know what you guys think. Again, I hope you guys enjoyed it, and again, please like, share, and subscribe. And I will have a new video on Wednesday, and it will be Logos Spermatikos versus perennialism, and you can be expecting that Wednesday. So with that being said, as always, until Wednesday, God bless.